Daniel, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Raul. It's great to be here.
We are in both sides of the world, different time zones, but present here together. Can you share a little bit more about who you are and a little bit about your history and context and what led you to the work you do today?
Sure. So I'm originally from New York. I'm American. My name is Daniel, as you introduced me already. And in terms of the work that I'm doing today, I'm a leadership coach. I coach a lot of people one-on-one. I work with teams globally from around the world on their team development. I do a lot of leadership training, and I have a mastermind leadership group now that I've founded that is truly unlike anything else I've seen because it brings together the rigor and the focus of all of these different training programs that I've done, but the sustainability and the accountability of coaching. And that's something I
Hmm.
haven't seen out there. So that's been a big focus of the past half year for me. And in terms of how I got into this work, I got into it totally through the back door. Things in life often make more sense in hindsight. So it does look, when I look backwards, like there's somehow a red thread. But in the midst of it all, it just felt like I was following a whole bunch of different impulses. I have degrees in psychology and economics, which is the part that makes it all look like it makes sense. But I detoured in everything from working in a cancer hospital to working in architecture to setting up a hotel in Morocco. And through all of that, finding a path into leadership through ballroom dance, of all things, and
Oh, wow.
using movement and using embodied leadership as a way of helping CEOs figure out their leadership style and their followership style. And that was something
Hmm.
I started about 15 years ago and led me to a whole journey of discovering that there's a huge field of leadership that is both fruitful and at the same time old school and dry and needs a revamp. And I've been trying to offer as many fresh and different and cutting edge and deep perspectives as I can to leaders large and small around the world. So that's a bit of my background.
I like that you're bringing a modern approach to an existing system, but then also shaking things up. I think one of the things that excited me the most when we're reviewing the work that you do is almost like instilling, at least with the founders that I work with, it's sometimes scary to step away. And there's a dichotomy of, okay, you have a team, you're scaling, but then sometimes the team does not have the same ownership mentality. I'd love to know a little bit more about how you work with leaders to develop that within the teams. But then, second, if it's not done correctly, then everything bottlenecks to the leadership, the founder or whoever is the owner of the business. They're the only ones that can solve any single problem versus empowering others to solve problems and really leverage people for their innate skill sets that they're in a role for, but also their ability to lead themselves and others in situations that you can never plan for. So let's dive a little bit about that. I would love to know what your thoughts around instilling ownership mentality within teams, but also in a really human centered way.
Yeah, I work a lot with founders of very successful scale ups. I myself am a founder of this leadership mastermind that I told you about. So I am seeing it from all sides.
Hmm.
And I think that from the perspective of a founder, it is all hands on deck. You just want to get everything done that needs to get done. It doesn't matter who does it. The eye is on the prize. There's so much endless amount of stuff to do. The to do list never stops. And so I understand and have a lot of sympathy and compassion for how difficult it is to instill any kind of leadership culture or any kind of succession thinking or any kind of upskilling for the next generation when you yourself are just knee deep or sometimes over your head in the amount of responsibilities that it takes to keep a business growing. So I really do get it. And more so in the past couple of years as I've been in my own business, how just complete other priority it feels to be thinking about helping future employees and future generations of people prepare to adopt all of the skills that you have and be able to hand that over. And with that compassion in mind, it is completely unacceptable for leaders to not do that. Because
Hmm.
what I see so often is that while leaders are focusing on all the things that need to be done to keep a business afloat, which is generally getting cash into the business so that it just has that constant fuel, there is a secondary factor that ends up being the factor that determines whether these startups turn into scale ups and ultimately turn into successful, sustainable companies. And that
Hmm.
has to do with culture. And it has to do with this thing that I see more and more, which is helping founders understand what their unique gifts are, what their unique contributions are, what their unique responsibilities are, and starting from the very earliest days to begin teaching other people how to think in the same way. And I see this through a few different bodies of work that I work closely with. One of them is a body of work from a guy named Peter Koenig around source and all about how founders are the source of a company. And that comes with a certain almost divine intuition of what is needed next. There's a felt sense that a founder has of what to do and what not to do and where to look and what the next thing on the horizon is. And that is magic. And that is something that absolutely is not replaceable by someone else until the founder has become aware of that skill and start helping other people understand where it comes from and what it feels like and what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. And at some point, source, this idea of source, can actually be handed over. It's something that you can formally hand over to other people in the company. You can help people step into their own sense of source, even within the specific roles that they have. And that allows them to make decisions that are as high quality as a founder would make. And the other body of work that I'm interested in is based off of a book from Bain and Company called The Founder's Mentality that looks at what are the specific things that are present in an organization in the early days that are present because things are so lean and so focused and so high speed and so connected to things like the uniqueness of a company and what it is trying to change in the market and how close it is to the customers and how action based it is and not bureaucratic it is, and how those are the factors that make the company so successful at the start. But as companies grow, typically beyond 30, 40, 50 people, it's those very same things that made it so successful in the beginning that it starts losing. And as more and more people join the company, as the company gets larger, as it grows, as it gets more successful, there tends to be a stepping away from the very dimensions that made the company so successful at the start. And people start becoming more competitive against each other. Silos start to develop. There's more internal focus on bureaucracy and on politics and on a headquarters and less focus on the very thing that made the company so successful in the first place, which is focusing on customers and focusing on the bottom line and focusing on frontline empowerment and focusing on being different from everyone else and focusing on doing things to learn and experiment and be agile as opposed to doing things for politics or game playing or getting ahead. And that skill is a skill. The founder's mentality, the thing that is its sourciness, can also be handed over. It can be taught. It can be shadowed. It can be apprenticed. But if the founder is not focused on that, as they begin to grow into their next role and potentially exit the company and think about who's going to take over, nobody else is ready to do it because they haven't been thinking in those terms. And that's part of this work that I think founders do way too late and then have to spend a huge amount of time catching up if they even can to try to make up for that lost time of really preparing the next generation to take over a company and lead it.
Yeah, because it's not like forefront important. Help me bring that down to earth. Like, how do founders actually implement this in day to day? Like, how are you helping teams do this in real life?
It's come to me, very often they are coming at the point of crisis. So I'll
No,
get
yeah, usually they don't seek help outside of themselves until they're like, this
exactly
is the
right.
problem. Yeah.
So I think there's one thing around how would you do this if you had the intuition and the foresight to do it in advance
Maybe
versus
let's talk about that in stages, right? Like, how do you do this early, like 1 to 5 years? How do you do this once you're growing and you're at the 20, 30 people? And then bring in also how you actually do this when there's crisis,
when it's a
because
crisis. Yeah.
that's a change management piece.
Yeah. So if you're thinking about this right at the beginning, what it means is going back to a classic model that we know so well from so many different age old industries of apprenticeship, right? An apprenticeship is nothing more than helping your people be in every single meeting, in every single context, in every single important conversation, not as participators, but as people who are just listening and observing and learning by watching, right? That's what apprenticeship is. It's somebody standing next to the master and just watching and
Mm.
learning and dissecting. And so I'll tell you what,
But very specific leaders, right? You can't just have the whole team on those meetings.
if we're talking about a company size that is 1 to 5 people, then you can,
You
right?
want everyone.
Right there
Mm.
at the start. Now, does it mean that all of those people need to be prepared to be future leaders? Probably not, right? I would choose
Mm.
who do I think from those original people that I'm bringing on board do I want to already start to understand the values that are so deeply intuitive and inherent to me, but are not necessarily to other people. And so what that means is, for example, like in my company right now, which is called the Modern Leader, I am training someone to one day take it over from me. And that means that in addition to having all of our normal synchronization meetings where we're covering metrics and project updates and how the clients are doing and looking at next steps and tasks and whatever, there's specific time also allocated for him to ask me about questions based on decisions he sees me make, conversations he sees me have, coaching
That's
he
cool.
sees me do. And then I actually ask him to play back first to me what he noticed, why he thinks that I did what I did, and what he would have done if he was in the situation. And I use
So
that.
let's pause that for a second because that's a brilliant technique. It's almost like I call it the three C's coaching, like three options, and then from there make a choice, and then tell me why that choice, and then from there I'll tell you what choice I would make. But I like this approach. Can you repeat that 3-step process again?
Yeah. So the process is every week when we speak, he needs to choose one situation that he observed me do something that was challenging, right? Something that he saw
Hmm.
me do that was a difficult decision that week or a difficult moment. Then he needs to analyze what was going on in that situation and understand it, first of all, from the challenge itself. I want to hear his thoughts and see how he breaks it down and what he thinks was difficult about it. And within doing that, to share what he then saw me do that handled the situation. Because I also want to hear what he is observing in terms of my skill set and start to play that back to him if he's missing key things that I'm doing. So that's the second step, right? The first step is to pick out a situation that's challenging. The second step is to then analyze what it is that is challenging about the situation and what I did. And the third thing is I want to hear what he would have done if he was in the situation. Would it be different?
Hmm.
Would it be similar? I'm not perfect. I'm not the only way that we can do things. He could totally have a different way of doing it. I don't care what the way is that he's doing it. What I care about is to hear his thinking. I want to
Hmm.
understand that he is starting to look at it through a value set or a metric or a filter that aligns with what I'm looking at it through. And this is apprenticeship.
There has to be a match. There has to be a match there because even if it was dramatically different, this is not the next person in line.
That's right. Or I feel that there is enough opportunity to coach that it's worth the investment, right?
Hmm.
And ultimately, what this conversation is a coaching conversation, right? It is not a telling conversation. It is not a teaching conversation. It's me coaching him to understand first where he's at and what he can improve. And then on top of that, if I feel there's still learning points that haven't landed, then I can add that afterwards. That is something that leaders should be doing with the major players in their team right from the start.
Yeah, yeah. I hear that. I think the word should is can be really hard. You should work out every day and eat healthy and sleep 8 hours, and you should not be in debt. But I hear that,
Nobody
and I
said
really want
leadership
to
is
aspire.
easy, right?
No one said it. No, that is the key thing.
And I
But
do,
I do
as I said,
aspire.
I have a huge compassion for this because I really understand how easy it is to get totally flooded by everything else going on. I think that the issue is that we believe, because of so many different examples, that the hard skills and the hard metrics and the hard improvements are somehow more important to focus on than these soft skills. And in the beginning, they are important, right? Because if you can't
Yeah,
get business in, clients in, the business will sink. And all I'm saying is that right now I see most startups not spending any time on this leadership stuff. And if they would
yeah,
increase it even by 10 or 20%, I'm not talking about using a whole meeting. In those meetings that I'm talking about with this one member of my team, if we have a 60-minute catch up meeting a week, we're using 10 minutes at the end of this meeting to do what I just described.
yeah. It doesn't have to absorb the whole thing. So I see the value here, and it was just like a tongue-in-cheek comment. But a quick note on the soft skills, hard skills. I think thankfully, and there's a lot of great things that have been happening with AI, but thankfully, and I had this thesis since like over 10 years ago, is the more technologically advanced that we get, the more human we have to become. So thankfully now with all the AI, all these key pieces that are like obsoleting certain job functions or making things more effective, one person can do three people's work. I think that does force us. There is a negative to that where people can just like, oh, I don't need to talk to humans. I can just do it through machines. But in the flip side, it does force us to focus on the other things that make us innately talented or unique versus just what a machine can do. So I think this is one of those key things. Let's put it in also in perspective. Most of the teams I work with are either 8 people, 40, 50 people, some a little bit larger, but it does range. It ranges from that. And I can definitely see different hierarchy level leaders of leadership, but they typically have an inner circle of leadership or executive crew. Maybe it's 3 or 5 people. As a leader in their journey, in their path, how do they do this just for everyone in their executive team, or is it always going to be for the person who's going to take over the company? Like, how do you decide? What's the framework to use to decide? Because the tools that you just mentioned are pivotal, and I think it's necessary. But how do you decide who to include? Why include that person? Is it depending on your goals in the business if you want to exit? Is it because you want the business to continue without you? Help me think through some of that thinking or that framework.
So I think first, what's important to identify is what happens around 30 or 40 people that is different than 10 or 15. To
Hmm.
me, everything changes in a business the moment that you cannot fit everyone in your company in one room anymore. Right?
Yes, like the layers of communication and then to coach people.
Exactly. The moment that people hear things through secondhand information, all of the amazing
That's
dynamics
a
of
great analogy.
miscommunication and misunderstanding start rearing
Yeah.
up their ugly faces. And that is just reality, right? So
Hmm.
part of recognizing the growth that happens in a startup or a scale up is recognizing that in the very beginning, everybody is directly connected to the founder. They hear them firsthand and they get to absorb that inspiration and that excitement and that vision. And the moment that people are hearing it through a second layer, it's going to be translated, it's going to be distilled, it's going to be watered down.
Hmm.
So, with that in mind, the thing that founders want to be thinking about all the time is how do they show up as a leader that not only is inspiring to everybody around them because they are so amazing, but is also starting to help other people become leaders that are inspiring as well within their company.
Mm.
The entire thing cannot rest on one person. It
Yeah.
can when it's 5 people, it can when it's 10 people, it can even when it's 20 or 25. But there's that critical moment where suddenly people are hearing information from their boss and not from you. And it's at that moment that founders need to be thinking about how do I start to instill a leadership culture? So, a
Mm.
leadership culture means not I am just putting someone in charge of other people because they happen to be the only person there and they've been doing the job for long enough. And so let me get them promoted, but actually identifying what are the leadership qualities that I stand for? What are the leadership quality that this company stands for? And how do
Mm.
I start looking and filtering through that lens to decide who I promote? So when you're asking me, who do I look for to start developing? What I would say is first identify what am I looking for that is going to support this company to move into the successful future, and then start to see either who naturally gravitates and fits into those descriptions, or how do I start actively training people? How do I start bringing in the kind of support? How do I start amplifying and increasing what I'm doing to a degree that other people actually become leaders in the company and not just followers or people who got promoted because they happen to be there for a while. And that's what I
And become
commonly
leaders. Yeah.
see is that most startups are promoting people who are totally unqualified to be leaders, have zero experience in leadership. They're just good at their individual contribution skill, have been there for a while, and now they're put in charge of managing other people, but not leading other people. And if you can make that switch from identifying people who are managers to looking for people who are leaders, you start to instill a culture in which that secondhand information that gets passed on is just as valuable as that firsthand information that they hear from you. And that's where you can start scouting and looking for who could potentially be this next generation of people that steps up when the time is ready for them.
Yeah, and not everyone is fit to lead because not everyone has the potential. Everyone has the potential, but I just don't think everyone has the character or the habits or the ironing. Like you mentioned, not everyone's fit to lead. You
And
can't
not
just train
everyone
them though.
wants to lead, right? Like it's super
Yeah.
important to recognize that having an expert who's an SME in their area and just wants to dive deep into their topic is amazing. And you need those people who just want to get the work done and want to be evaluated on their own performance. But there are people who want to grow, who want to develop into leadership. I totally agree with you that leadership is someone anyone can learn. I don't think we only have born leaders. I completely believe we can make leaders, but we need to have a leadership culture in place and someone
Yeah.
who's holding that and sponsoring that and fighting for that. And the only person who can do that, especially in a small company, is the founder. And most often I see founders so distracted by other things that they assume that leadership and culture will just manifest naturally. And it doesn't, right? What manifests instead is a dysfunctional culture, a culture in which things are not working, a culture in which there is no leadership. And that then opens up this crisis phase that I mentioned before, where people then end up contacting me and saying, what do we do?
Yeah. That's fascinating. Sometimes just seeing it from the inside and for some past clients is that the founder needs their own time. Sometimes they need to mature enough to learn that this is actually the most important thing, especially in a labor intensive business. Your people are the most important. And then once they get that wake up call, then like, okay, now I should have been. And sometimes you can convince them of that in the beginning. Not that you should look to convince, but I also think it's like a person needs to realize that for themselves first, ideally without hazard crisis happening.
And the reality is that it's usually hazard and crisis that wakes us up to change, right? So
Yeah,
most
it sounds the friction has to happen. I
the first has to
understand that.
happen, right? And I also think there's something beautiful about recognizing what you just, which is it has to happen at the right time, right? And
Mhm.
an organization is nothing more than a mirror and an amplifier of the founder. So all of the shadow sides of the founder, all the parts of themselves that they're not interested in
Yeah,
looking, all of the aspects that
greatly.
they haven't yet explored only become amplified and become larger than life in an organization as it grows. And so if someone as a leader has not taken any time to explore who they are, what their values are, what their limiting beliefs are, what their patterns are, what their traumas are, what they've inherited from their childhood and never unmasked and unpacked and worked on, they will at some point be confronted by those things through the organization because the organization acts like both an echo chamber and a mirror of all of
Yeah.
the things that are going on inside them. So I find that what most often happens is that in the beginning, founders are totally uninterested in this work because the company is hopefully doing well, things are growing, and they don't see the reason for it. And at a
Mhm.
certain point, they start noticing that there are patterns and behaviors and things showing up in the company that are so against what they actually want and so working against the vision and the mission and the purpose and so dysfunctional towards creating a healthy, sustainable, trust built company that they find themselves looking into a company that they almost don't recognize and asking, how did this happen? What is it that
Mhm.
I did or didn't do that could create a culture where there is so much competition, mistrust, people trying to step over each other? And when we look into that in more detail, we see that there is nothing that happens in a culture of a founder's company that wasn't somehow in place in their own personality or in the parts of their personality that they aren't willing to look at. And when
Mhm.
they realize that, because the company for them is usually so important and something like a child or a baby for them, there's enough incentive for the first time to start doing coaching, to start working on themselves, to understand what's going on within their own dynamics and limiting beliefs and patterns. And the moment they start working on that, they realize that these are the exact same factors that are at play in the larger organization.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting echo of what you're saying here that I've heard and seen in the past is that your clients are a mirror of who you are, and the organization is a mirror of your personality. And as
100%.
much as we hate to admit that, we're still human. Organizations are organisms, just humans collaborating together.
Mm.
And if that's led by ideas and words, and that's the most powerful, communication is the most powerful thing. You
And it's a
communicate
beautiful
both.
thing. I love that. If we flip it around and say, what an exciting opportunity to have such a huge mirror in front of our faces that plays back to us every day, whether we're making improvements or not. There's very few things in life besides work and personal relationships that give us the opportunity to actually do this kind of self development work. And in relationships, unless there's a therapist or someone involved, it often just spirals into its own nasty dynamics. So
Mhm.
it's work where we actually have the structures and the incentives and potentially the support to actually move through those dynamics and to
Yeah.
understand what's happening rather than just feeling victim to it. And I think that's part of the beauty of work is that it gives us so much chance. We're there for so many hours a day. We're dealing with so many different types of people. It gives us so much chance to actually do the personal journey work that one way or another has to happen, whether we decide to do it there or somewhere else. And why not do it there then?
Yeah. I find that there should be baby steps to take this journey. There's books, and I think those are helpful. Do you have an app where people can actually work through exercises to figure that out, like self coaching? There has to be a way for people to this in a low cost subscription way. Because sometimes bringing in a coach, you got to vet coaches, feel comfortable, the team's comfortable, the whole process. But then books are great, but that's only helping one person. And I've seen there was another person on the podcast. She created an app that does like leadership stuff and lessons for teams. It wasn't a perfect solution, but I feel like it's going down this route is how do we actively take action towards this framework, either to self-develop and then when you're ready, bring in that next person that can help you actually walk and guide you. Do you
Yeah.
know those resources? That's something you've developed?
So this is exactly the startup that I created, right? Because here's what I saw over the 15 years that I've been doing this work, which is there are two ways generally in which companies try to develop people. The first way is they send them on a leadership program, right? And the leadership program is often like a 2, 3 day, 4 day thing, super impactful, super high energy, super connecting. And a week later, everybody has forgotten everything.
Yeah,
That's the
it
first
dies
thing,
off.
right?
Throwing money at a problem doesn't always solve the problem.
Absolutely.
I've seen
And
that.
great content, by the way. If people could
Oh, they're
sustain the
great
content,
programs. Yeah.
great programs. So that's the first thing. And that has been like a real difficult pill for me to swallow because I'm very often the trainer of these programs. And so to
Yeah.
recognize that I'm doing amazing work that people forget about in a week is painful. Now, here's the second piece that people send often high potential or talents, top talents to, which is one-on-one coaching, right? I'm also a one-on-one coach. So I receive a lot of top talents from companies who say, we need this person to be upskilled in leadership. And what I've started saying back is, look, one-on-one coaching is amazing, but there is zero consistency in one-on-one coaching. There is zero
Mm,
pre-planned programming or training. It is just a follow the conversation type of experience. And I cannot guarantee that this person will become the kind of leader that your organization needs because there's no standard, there's no model that we're basing that on. So I found myself stuck in a gap between doing trainings that have incredible content, but no follow up and
mhm,
accountability, doing coachings that have incredible accountability and follow up, but no training and content. And that is where I created this program that I mentioned to you, which is called the Modern Leader, which is bringing together the best of both of these worlds, which is a program that is mostly online, also has some in person aspects, gives you a plan, gives you a training, but also gives you the support, the accountability, and the community to keep
mm,
going. Learn about the content at your own pace. There's a million amazing videos and pieces of content that we push towards you as you are ready to work on specific elements of your leadership. But you also have the in person touch points that make
mm,
sure that it's actually customized and that it allows you to move at your own speed. And for a company, this is the solution that I'm starting to see, which is as I speak more and more to clients that I have that are really trying to say, how do I get people involved in a first step interaction with leadership, right? Not like at the complex high levels of like very sophisticated leadership, but rather what you were just asking about, learning the essentials, learning the basics, something that's low cost, something that's entry level. This is exactly what I've created that has really a dimensional based model that if you go through this program, you are guaranteed to come out a fantastic leader at various levels, depending on which level you enter the program at. And then companies can look at how do we then take this further and support that. And honestly, obviously, I'd rather much easier for me to talk about someone else's program than my own because talking about my own stuff just feels incredibly narcissistic. I have not seen anything else out there like this. That's why I created it.
mm.
I haven't seen any program, and I've led thousands of them that cracked both the content and accountability balance. And that's why I created the Modern Leader.
I like that. How do companies keep it account if I'm a founder, but if I send teams to that, because I've also had this too, like I paid for subscriptions. I'm not going to name names, but I paid for this for people to go. How do I keep tabs and accountability of the progress that someone else is making and ensuring that they're taking action so I can see the fruits of them, not just, again, throw money at a problem? How do you help organizations keep that accountability so that they know that the people that they're sending it through are taking action?
Yeah, there's three parts to that. So the first is we have to agree on leadership dimensions and capabilities that we both think are important, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's how are we actually assessing people? Now, I've developed a model that has 9 dimensions that sit under 3 main dimensions. I believe that model is universal. The subtitle of the program is Become Someone Worth Following. And I believe that if you learn these skills in these dimensions that I've put together, you will be someone worth following. And when I work with organizations, what we do is overlap my model with theirs. And it generally is a one-to-one fit because these criteria and these skills are so fundamental to what every leader needs. So we need to agree first on
Mm-hmm.
what the model is that we're both saying makes a good leader, makes someone worth following. Then, in terms of actual experience in the program itself, everything is automated. You can see completely how much people are participating. There's lots of different checkpoints and assessments and steps along the way that help you see, okay, these people are attending these courses. They've completed these modules. They have completed these assessments. They've completed these quizzes. They are applying this amount of stuff. And as they move through the model and through the program, you can see the different parts of the program that they have essentially gotten credit for that match
Mm.
with the overall model that we have agreed with the client is what makes a good leader in their context. But then the last and most important indicator of whether they're actually doing this stuff is how they show up at work. And that has been the most
Yeah, yeah, just
amazing
seeing
thing.
the fruits of that, like
You
in a
just
real
see the
person
benefits of it.
in
And
real
I've
life.
seen people who go through this program who are not just feeling more confident, feeling more focused, feeling more able, but that they are getting so much feedback from other people around them who are saying, oh my God, what has changed in you? And how do I spend more time with you? And how do I get mentored by you? And how did you become so calm? And how did you handle this situation so well? And that is the feedback that ultimately says whether these types of programs work or not. And it's been for me, honestly, really humbling to see that after so many years of spending so much time investing in lots of programs that have not produced that kind of impact, that after only a few months of going through this one, people are already getting that kind of feedback. And I think that to me is the ultimate ROI that any leader sending a person on a program like this would want to get.
Yeah, and I think from a business model perspective, it's cool to see how you played with the different models. The because this is a similar like the coaching thing. You do live events, you do speaking, or you do one-on-one. It's cool that you found an interim model where it's more like the daily golden nuggets for them to continue every day versus this whole grandiose mountain that they have to climb over a weekend. And I
Yeah.
think for our listeners there, one, like leadership, definitely invest in it. Check out, we'll send where people can check out the program. But second, also get inspired for how you can leverage deliverables in a way that meets the market needs in an interesting way and also actually gets them better results, even if that does mean changing the business model, changing the approach, and changing the delivery and packaging that solution. So I find that fascinating from both fronts. Daniel, for our listeners out there, where's the best place for people to, one, thank you for being on, and two, learn more about your work?
Yeah, the normal social media channels. So on Instagram, Daniel.Ludevig, on LinkedIn, the same name. And the website is moveleadership.com. So if they enter into any of those places, they can get in touch. And I would love to hear about what some of their challenges are.
Wonderful. Daniel, put those links in the show notes and we'll go from here. Thank you for being on.
Thank you, Raul. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to get more of these podcasts, please go ahead and subscribe to wherever you're watching or listening to the pod. If you have any suggestions or questions that you want me to answer on the pod, or you have a guest that you want me to interview, please go ahead and email me all of your suggestions and questions at podcast@dogoodwork.io. That's podcast@dogoodwork.io. If you'd like to give me public feedback, you can go on Apple Podcasts, and from there, you can leave up to a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate that. If you like more free resources where you can get my best strategies to help you increase your company's performance and scale profitably, you can get handpicked articles to propel your growth, and you can get trainings and discussions that I give freely online, as well as low-cost resources such as my books and guides. You can get all of that by going to dogoodwork.io/free-growth-resources. 90% of all of these resources are not behind any email opt-ins. You can get instant access by going to dogoodwork.io/free-growth-resources. Now, if you'd like to accelerate your progress and shorten the gap between information and action and start seeing results in your business, let's work together to increase your company's performance and scale profitably and serve more clients without the overwhelm. You can request a free clarity call to see how we can best support you to reach your goals by going to dogoodwork.io/apply. Again, that's dogoodwork.io/apply. As always, it's an honor to be a small part in your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.